What's going on, everybody? We are back. Very special episode on the way for you all today. We are doing a full 32 team first round mock draft for you guys. We've seen the comments on the videos and know that there is like nothing that NFL draft fans love more than a good old mock draft. So we're excited to go through this just to give you guys an idea on how we think the board could potentially play out. But more than anything, like share some of our scouting nuggets on each of these players and their potential fit on these respective teams. Of course, since many of you guys watching this video are particularly interested in what happens in Pittsburgh from Steelers country, so we'll spend a couple extra minutes kind of talking about their selection, what's available on the board once we get to that part of the video. But just for full transparency, guys, we are recording this a little bit early before the Super Bowl just due to our kind of conflicting schedules. But first things first, Nick Martin, how we doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. You never know how the first mock draft's gonna go. Like that first mock draft, you never know how it goes like compared to like consensus. And then like you look at it towards the end, you're like, yeah, I think this makes sense. And then you probably look back on it like a couple months from now and you're like, oh man, what the heck was I looking at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun exercise to do. Like I said, I like doing these like especially earlier in the process. As more like we talked about trying to blend it to like what we think we would do, but also like what we think that these teams will be looking for in terms of their team building process. And I just think it's a fun exercise to do to get people kind of like our quick cliff notes on a lot of these prospects that are going to be going early in the draft. So I'm really excited about it. Just before we get started, if you guys would, please make sure to like the video, subscribe, drop us a comment on your favorite selections in this process, or if you guys have, fits that you guys would like to see. And also, if you have any questions for Nick or myself, the best ones will have a chance to get answered in our next video. This gives us a good opportunity to kind of interact with the community, which we're all about, and also making sure we're getting you guys the content that you're most interested in. So, without further ado, man, you just want to jump right into this thing?
Yes, sir. Let's hear
Okay,
it.
so I'm gonna take the odds in this. Like I said, we're doing this kind of as a blend on like what we would do, but also like what we think that the teams will do. We're still pre-free agency, so some of the needs for these respective franchises will get more clarification on that stuff as we go along in the process. We get closer to the combine, we start hearing more smoke about where these franchises are kind of headed. But with the first pick, we're not going to do trades in this one either. Like we may do like more mock drafts like down the line. Like I definitely will do, at least some for myself on the channel. But we're not going to do trades for this one either. So with the Titans having the number one pick, everything coming out of that building says that they aren't going to pass on like a generational talent. That's what they said, just to take a quarterback because they feel like they need one. Honestly, I think I kind of believe them. They got a second year head coach in Brian Callahan. They got a first year GM. Ultimately, I think this kind of comes down to me between two players. I think it's Travis Hunter from Colorado. That's who I'm going to go with here. I just think he's wired differently, man. Like the effort, the production, while playing, over 100 snaps on almost a weekly basis is just something that I'm not really sure that we're going to see again for quite a long time.
Freak
My
show.
idea for Travis, man, like I want to play him at corner. I think that's his best long-term fit. I think that well, I do think that he would be a really, really good wide receiver prospect as well. I have him graded in eval in both spots. But I think my ideal situation for him is to play corner, and then you have like 15 snaps or so, a package of plays on offense in order to get the ball in his hands. But the things I like with him, man, like he just got a really special feel in zone coverage. Really impressive click and close ability. The ball skills are unbelievable. You see that when he's on defense, when he's on offense, like his ability to make those splash plays happen. And I just think Hunter's going to be a really unique player at the NFL. I can't wait to watch him. And with the Titans kind of moving into like a new stadium, a totally different regime, I just think that he could give you like that type of face of the franchise look that can help you on both sides of the ball.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you mentioned like his ability in zone, like it's probably about as special as like a
It's going to
like,
get,
yeah. He
yeah.
was he was one of those like guys that like I think in terms of ball skills, he's probably like second to like Derek Stingley for me. But
Hmm.
you mentioned the other prospect who could be potentially can't miss in this class for the Cleveland Browns. I'm going to go with Abdul Carter out of Penn State. He was my edge one coming into the into the year, despite the fact he had not played primarily on the edge, but you could really see a lot of like the potential there with his ability with his hands, the bend, the speed off the edge, and it really just kept coming along for them. With Myles Garrett, having that trade request, the Browns seemingly moving on from their failed Deshaun Watson window, you got to stack the best available talent. And I just think Carter's blends of traits and his rapid ascension just makes him such an easy slam dunk selection at this part of the draft. I was really impressed with his ability just to mirror his mirror his pass rush. Like, you watch him be able to change his steps out of his stance. Like, it was consistent with how he was just able to set guys up and then
Yeah.
beat him off the edge. Like, I was really impressed with him.
Yeah, Carter's an absolute monster, man. Like, you just look at the ability to win off the edge, threaten the outside shoulder with the speed, because the burst and the explosiveness off the ball is incredible. And then he's got that quick change of direction ability, like you mentioned, just to cross face. If you do turn your shoulders to him, he'll easily slip inside. And I think he's a guy that is assuming that the Myles Garrett thing does end that way and he ends up getting dealt. I can't think of a better way to kind of transition to a player like this. That I think, for me, Hunter and Carter are kind of a 1A, 1B almost in their own kind of tier in this class. Without a ton of blue chip talent, but there are some really impressive players that we're going to talk about. Now, kind of moving on to the next pick, man. The Giants have picked 3. Talked about Tennessee. The Giants are in a different situation. They have to take a quarterback. Like, they're kind of cornered into this. It's not optional for them, in my opinion. Not only do they have to take one, this kid, whoever they take, really needs to be good almost immediately for Brian Daboll, Joe Shane to kind of save their jobs. My quarterback 1 in this class is Cam Ward from Miami. Has been for several months now. He carries more of a late first, kind of early second type of grade for me. But I am excited about what he could potentially become in a good ecosystem, provided he lands in the right spot. And I just think when you watch Cam, you see a player that can, throw from a myriad of different arm angles. He's got a quick release, throws with velocity. When you watch him, there's a sense of calmness, confidence, and poise to his game. He rarely looks frazzled or out of sorts. 5 years of starting experience. We looked at the guys in the NFL this past season, rookies that came in with a ton of reps under their belt, how that helped their transition. He just got better and better as he kept taking leaps in competition, from Incarnate Ward to Washington State, and then all the way up to Miami this year. I think sometimes he definitely plays too free, leads to some poor decision making. The key is going to be able to get him to play a little bit more on time and quick in the pocket. That's going to be some footwork related stuff that he's going to have to get worked out. He's a little loosey goosey in his drop for me. But Brian Daboll once helped a really raw quarterback once upon a time in Buffalo develop into a superstar. And I don't think that Ward has that type of ceiling. But I do think that he can be a good starter in the future. And this is a bet, like I said, that the Giants have to make. And I actually think that the pairing kind of makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the type of quarterback that makes sense for Brian Daboll. And you mentioned his ascension, throughout each year. And you mentioned the footwork. He's got to be able to tie that footwork better to the route concepts and stuff like that. That's going to be the biggest question for him, I think, going into this process. But the Patriots are in such a weird position because this draft has a lot of tackles that are going to probably move to guard at the next level. So I'm going to go with a bit of a hot take at number 4. I'm going to go with Armand Membou out of Missouri. And he's just got that optimal build that I like to look for in a tackle. He's built lower to the ground. He's around 6'3.5", but he's got 34-inch arms. He's got such a refined set of hands. And you watch him be able to move out in space. He has that ability to be a huge threat as a zone blocker, but also as a move blocker out in space. You watch him be able to finish. Some of it kind of reminds me of Troy Fautanu last year. And he's only 20 years old. There's plenty of upside here. So I actually think this is a good situation for the Patriots. Take the best available tackle. And I think Membou might just be the best pure tackle in this class. We'll have to see as I continue to go throughout the board, but I liked Membou at the spot.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people that are, kind of slotting him into that interior offensive line spot. But I just think, with the technical advancement that he comes with, and he actually has tackle type arms, I think that there's a lot to like, especially in pass pro, man. You mentioned the kind of some of the similarities between him and Fautanu. I do see them as Somewhat similar movers in the game with some of the same weaknesses, just in terms of like sometimes I think that Mimbu can get walked back a little bit to power, but he's a really good player, man. Like when I think I remember Brandon Thorne talking about him a couple months ago, and some of the clips that he was sharing were almost like eye popping to me. It was like, oh, I got to watch this dude. It seems like his stock is really picking up steam to where I don't think this could be a crazy selection. Like the closer we get to the draft, even though this is kind of higher than I think most people maybe have seen him in the big media, but this is a really good player. Number 5, I'm for Jacksonville. The situation here, it's been a wild start to the offseason, man, with all the stuff with their coaching search. But I did love watching Liam Cohen's offense last year. I'm kind of excited to see what he can do down south. But I look at this roster, man, I just feel like they underachieved with their talent at their disposal last year. Maybe I'll end up getting burned again for saying that. But for me, I'm going to take the best player available here on my board. I'm going to take Mason Graham for Michigan. Plug him into the interior. You already got the established edge rusher duo on the outside with Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, who I thought actually did take a step forward in 2024. But, Graham was one of my favorite players watching coming out of summer scouting. Powerful dude, effective in terms of stacking, peeking, and shedding blocks at the line of scrimmage. He's got the burst to make plays away from his gap. You just have to watch the Ohio State game. I keep on saying it on this channel, but it's one of my favorite games from this season so far. But you'll be sold on him as a player if you pop that on. Really active hands. I mean, he loves the two-hand swipe, consistently plays with great leverage in both phases of the game. Like I said, man, he's an underclassman. I think he's got a lot more room to continue growing as a player. I did see some nice steps forward. But I just think he comes equipped with like such a solid floor. And I think that the upside there is for him to be like a legitimate like top 10 player at his position. I'm very comfortable. I think you know what you're going to get with Mason Graham. And in a draft that doesn't have a lot of superstar type talent, this is like one of those like surefire picks that I'm really excited about.
Definitely. And, with no Trent Baalke there now, they're not going to be afraid to pick the star Michigan player.
And without the arm length, he's not the longest dude, but
yeah,
the dude can get off blocks, man. He's a playmaker.
Oh, for sure. And, we talk about how free agency is going to define like this whole, like what teams are going to be looking for needs wise in the draft. But the Las Vegas Raiders, they could be one of the Sam Darnold destination teams, but considering what I've kind of been reading about Shedeur Sanders and how much he really wants to be in an opportunity that like really fits him, I think Shedeur would make a lot of sense just with the Raiders at this juncture. I have issues with his game. There are definitely a lot of tendencies to take sacks, but one thing I have been very pleased with, he's just so consistently accurate. He delivers a nice, soft, catchable ball for his receivers, layers it extremely well in the middle of the field. And I do have some issues with his footwork that generally hinder his ability to generate torque, but I do think it's actually something he can improve upon, similar to what we saw with Burrow. I don't think they're similar prospects, but I do think there's similarities in terms of some of their weaknesses and strengths. Actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Geno coming out of college, because Geno had a lot of toesiness to like how he played, and he actually had bad tendencies to take sacks. Like he wasn't someone who commanded the pocket like extremely well. So I think Pete Carroll might see a lot of that in him, and he could see that as a huge development plan. So I'm going to go with Shedeur here.
Yeah, I like that fit for sure. I think with Sanders, I think the accuracy is like something that really cannot be understated with him. Like the ball placement's consistently on point. He'll throw over the middle of the field. Also, like one of the things I really like about Shedeur is like he's just tough as nails, man. Like this dude will stand down the barrel of the gun, deliver throws. Obviously not a perfect prospect, doesn't have like the high end caliber tools. And I think there are definitely questions about his ceiling. That's why I'm a little bit lower on him than where he's going to end up being taken, because we know the teams are desperate for quarterbacks, especially in the NFL right now. But Sanders does have like solid starter kind of upside, in my opinion, if he gets some of the other things worked out. Up next for me is the New York Jets. Every year I feel like you have some good takes. You got some bad takes about what's going to transpire in the league, right? Easily my best take this past season was that the Jets were going to be a disaster, and that's exactly what happened. But new regime, I am hyped for Aaron Glenn, man. I've liked a lot of the stuff that he said publicly since taking that job. But team's not devoid of talent, but it's going to be a multi-year process. They desperately need playmakers to complement Garrett Wilson, one of my favorite prospects coming out of Ohio State a couple years ago. Devontae Adams, you got to understand, like, without Aaron Rodgers coming back, you look at his contract, it's hard to see him coming back. So I'm going to take a playmaker here, but I'm actually going to take Tyler Warren. This cat's a joy to watch, man, out of Penn State. Tight end, got a really strong build, plus play strength for the position. You just see how he uses his size to create space for himself at the break point. Guys just consistently bounce off of him. He's a tank with the football in his hands, can create those easy chunk yards after the catch. He's not necessarily a freak athlete like the guys that we typically see drafted inside the top 10 at the tight end position. But honestly, it doesn't bother me at all, just because of how impressed I was with his blocking ability, particularly down the stretch in their like postseason run. I came in like middle of the way through the season when I actually got my eyes on his film, and I was like, okay, he's a functional inline blocker. Honestly, I completely changed my tune on that. I actually think like he's an above average or solid blocker in the run game, and I think he's got even more promise to his game in that regard. And considering how well-rounded his game is and how he was a legitimate asset or weapon for Penn State in the blocking game, I think this is a really good fit for the Jets, who not only do they need pass catchers, but they haven't ran the ball very well either with Breece Hall in the backfield. So I just think like he gives them a dynamic player up at the top of the draft and someone that they could depend on offensively.
People underrate Warren a lot athletically. Like, you watch him move out in space, and you even watch him in a straight line, like against Purdue, like a couple of years ago. Like, he can clearly move. I think there's a little bit of a narrative around him that I don't quite agree with. But in regards to the next team, Carolina Panthers, when your best starting edge rusher is an old Jadeveon Clowney, I don't think it's a good sign for your defense. So I'm going to bring in the highest upside pass rusher, maybe even the highest upside of any prospect in this class, in Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. When it comes to his blend of athletic traits, I mean, he's a 280-pound frame, but like he's able to bend around that corner just at a level that like has you just absolutely jaw dropped just watching it, especially down in Mobile. I mean, he was just dominant throughout the entire time, and like he really showed that he was that type of prospect. And like, you look at the production, I mean, people would be like, well, what do you mean? Like, I don't know. This guy didn't really produce, but the film shows a completely different story than of this ability to win one-on-one. There's more pressures than you would think going into that film. And I think he has elite edge one level upside in regards to his potential with not just his bend, but also his power profile. And I'm really excited for the type of prospect he could be at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, this is a complete like moldable ball of clay.
Yes.
All of the possibilities are on the table. It's just a matter of like how quickly and rapidly he can develop at the next level. But the combination of like size, athleticism, and just like overall tool set is pretty unbelievable. So like even if the production isn't necessarily what you would want it to be, you can easily envision this player like becoming an impact starter for you, down the line with one of the highest upsides in the entire draft. So moving on to the Saints, who pick at 9, man, of all these teams that we've discussed up to this point in the show, there's not a franchise with like a more bleak outlook than New Orleans, man. They don't even have a head coach as we sit here and record this. I mean, it's insane. Mock drafting for them, honestly, isn't all that difficult just because their rosters just lacking up and down the board. I'm going to go cornerback here. I'm going to take Will Johnson from Michigan and pair him with Kool-Aid McKinstry, who they took last year. Paulson Adebo is a free agent. I think that, this is a big physical corner, listed 6'2", 200 pounds. He's got over 32-inch arms, so he's big, long, physical. You could tell as soon as he stepped foot on campus in Ann Arbor, man, that this was going to be a Sunday player. Has all the looks of like what you want at the position. He's a fluid, short area mover. He's technically refined in terms of like the nuances of playing the quarterback position, especially when he's in press. Route recognition is a plus on his tape. And I don't think 2024 was necessarily his best year, but his ability to process information was on display. We saw him come down and pick off 2 passes and take them to the house in the flat area for pick 6s. Personally, I don't know how healthy he was this past year. I mean, he missed some time. And even before then, he just didn't really look like the same player that I saw the first 2 years as a Wolverine. But, he's going to probably need to run like a pretty solid 40 time. To me, his long speed isn't necessarily like a huge red flag, more than it is like I think he just kind of checks the box in terms of that. Like you will see guys test him vertically, but Yeah, I mean, I love what this dude brings to the table. I think if he runs a solid 40 time, whether it's at Indy or at his pro day, I think we're going to be talking about a really him back into like the top 10 solidification process. But I'm just trusting the first 2 years of his film, and that's more of an indicator of what he'll be at the next level.
Definitely. You mentioned the speed. I mean, athletically, he was on the Bruce Feldman freak list, and like he did like the three cone reportedly in like 6.57
For
seconds. Like that's
yeah,
insane. And his 20
for
yard
a
shuttle
bigger
was like 405. I mean,
yeah.
he is a quick cat for someone that big.
Yeah, for
And
a bigger corner, he is very, very fluid in terms of like
yes.
changing directions in a short area of space, and those things are really important. That's what's going to matter a lot at the next level. And like I said, the deep speed thing to me is more just like just run a 4.5 so we could just stop talking about it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And I think that that's where we're going to end up, but we'll see.
All right. Well, with Chicago needing interior offensive line help, and this class having about as many tackles potentially converting to guard as it does, I'm going
Hmm.
to give them Will Campbell out of LSU. He's got like the opposite type of frame that I usually look for in an offensive tackle. Like he's kind of tall, built upright. He's got like some really short arms, and you can even see it on the film. Like
For
he
sure.
doesn't quite have that long of a punch in terms of his length, and you could just kind of see it. But what he does have is that ready-made hand usage and that notable grip strength. Like I remember watching Brandon Thorne cut up a couple of plays with him too, and he is just smart. Like you can really
Oh yeah.
tell that he has it like going on above the neck, and like I really like seeing that in a potential convert. I think he's kind of similar to Peter Skoronsky, like coming out in terms of just like they have that readiness to be a tackle, but they just don't quite have the length that you want. And with the Bears just needing to protect Caleb Williams better, I just think this is kind of a no brainer. So take the best available guard. And to me, that's probably Will Campbell at this point.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Chicago's got to get better along the interior. I think with Campbell, the thing that you mentioned, the grip strength, just his ability to sustain blocks and like torque defenders out of the gap, man, was just like really evident when you watch him run block. And I do think, like as a pass protector, like the length, like you will see guys get on his outside shoulder pretty easily. There's obvious deficiencies there. I want to slide him inside. I don't remember who it was. It might have been Brandon Thorne, but I remember like earlier in the season that there was some potential comparisons to like he could be like a DeCastro level guard. So like top 10, we don't see a lot of guards take it top 10, but if you're getting that level of player, you can set it and forget it. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
that's definitely worth the investment. So kind of the next player we're going to talk about, you talked about offensive tackle converts. The Niners here, they had a season from hell, man. Like you look at just losing to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl 12 months ago. They got an old roster. They finished with a terrible record. They've got some big decisions on some of their core pieces. Debo Samuel,
Terrible
obviously,
injuries too.
yeah. I mean, just absolutely wrecked. They got the Brock Purdy contract extension, which is going to come up. That seems like a formality at this point. We'll see what the number ends up at. Aaron Banks, their left guard, is an impending free agent. I think they could use maybe a guard in general anyways. I'm going to take Kelvin Banks from Texas and kind of slide him into that spot next to Trent Williams as kind of a mentor. But he's a really solid athlete for 325. He could pop out of his stance with quickness, agile enough to get to the second level. You see some really nice plays in the screen game with him out in space. I really love his hand usage, man. It's by far my most the most intriguing part of his profile. He's really patient. He understands how to bait defenders into kind of clearing their intent first. I mean, this is a known commodity, man. Like he's got 3 years of starting experience, like over 2,400 snaps while at Texas. Over the last 2 seasons, he's allowed single-digit pressures and pass protection. Um, True starter as a freshman. This is the reason for that I'm moving him on the inside, man. It's just I don't think he has the ideal length that you desire to play at tackles. And there's just times where I felt like when he did lose reps, it was just because he wasn't able to kind of establish that first meaningful contact. He allowed guys to get into his frame, sometimes a little bit bendy at the waist, which I don't particularly love, but he may take a little bit of time, but I do think that the Niners, specifically Kyle Shanahan, always do a really good job of helping their offensive line schematically, and I think you could reap the rewards long term on a talent just like this. So while he continues to kind of develop on the fly, so I like the fit.
I'm still going through his film, but I'm a little bit more like lower on the athleticism aspect
Hmm.
of his game, which is actually why I want him at guard as opposed to tackle.
Yeah.
And man, this next pick, Dallas is they had such a strange season where like Dak was struggling in the beginning of the season, and then all of a sudden they were competing with Cooper Rush down the stretch, and then they didn't make playoffs and things didn't go right. I mean, this pick could go so many different ways. And honestly, looking at some of their hires, like their offensive line coach, I really think they might just be going to like full on like establish the run type mentality. But I really
Yep.
think Dak needs some help outside of just CD Lamb and Ferguson. So I'm gonna give them Luther Burden out of Missouri. I really think the injury is keeping people from realizing that Burden was one of the best receivers in the country a year prior. And like you can watch him beat guys vertically, his ability as a yak threat, like he has incredible contact balance, just be able to maintain himself after the hit, during the hit. It kind of reminds me a little bit of DJ Moore, honestly, coming out of Maryland. And I really think that type of receiver can just take the load off a guy, you know, for a quarterback like Dak Prescott, who actually needs more easy buttons. And, you know, giving an easy button is giving them that yak threat underneath, and, you know, be able to create something out of nothing. Like that's what Luther Burden can bring. So I'm going to give him the Dallas.
Yeah, you mentioned just like the easy button stuff, the stuff that he can do with the ball in his hands, but he can also track the ball really well for a guy like he has that. You mentioned DJ
Absolutely.
Moore, that's a great shout, great comp, just because their body compositions are kind of similar. But he tracks the ball really well. I think some of the production you mentioned the injury, just like quarterback play took a step back this past
Yes.
year. There was a lot more like inaccurate targets, at least in the games that I studied. So yeah, I'm excited about what Burton could potentially be. I know he was just going bananas in 2023. So I'm excited to see what he does at the next level. All right, next up for us, I think we got the Dolphins at 13. Miami's a really interesting roster, man, because you look at this thing, a lot of their best players just have injury concerns, like starting with the
Yeah.
quarterback. So, like, when you look at their cap situation and everything, I don't really know what to do with this team at all. Like, it seems like they're just going to kind of keep trucking this thing forward maybe for another year, and just kind of hope that everything falls into place for them from an injury perspective. But I do like that Anthony Weaver's coming back as their defensive coordinator. I'm going to give him another chess piece to work with. I'm going to take Malachi Starks. This is the kind of the
Love it.
range where I can start to see him come off the board as in the mid teens. But he's been a versatile chess piece for the Bulldogs defense for 3 straight seasons. Another one of these young underclassmen. We don't have a ton of them in this class, but he's one of them. They put a ton on his plate. I think football IQ is definitely something that stands out with how much they trust him. His hips are really fluid. He's an easy mover, especially for the safety position. If you want somebody that can come down, play man coverage in the slot, match up with different body types. Quick accelerator, gets to the top speed in a hurry, man. He could carry targets vertically for you. The ball skills really leap off the tape. Whether that's like him being a kind of calculated risk taker, like undercutting throws over the middle, whether it's going to leap up and play the ball at the apex, moss receivers at the high point. He's a trustworthy tackler. I think he's got the pursuit speed, the closing speed, and the burst to kind of make things right up front if you get some mistakes in the run fit. So, strangely enough, this is another guy that I don't think like played his best football in 2024. There were some lapses in coverage that I think were notable, but this is still like a really unique player in the back end of your defense and can kind of do a lot of different things for you, wear a lot of different hats. But I think as a center fielder, that's where you could really maybe get the best out of him. But this is a unique player with the right defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about his responsibilities. For me, it's the ball skills. His ability to play the ball in the air is like a
Oh
wide
yeah,
receiver. You watch him like keep those hands tight, like just like high pointing it above the rim. Like there's some special stuff with
natural
Malachi
playmaker.
Starks. Absolutely. Now, in terms of a team that also needs defensive back help, the Indianapolis Colts. The injury to Juju Brents just kind of put a giant cloud over the
Sure.
Colts starting cornerback spots, and like I don't even know if they can really count on him for this season. And knowing Ballard's flavor of cornerback, he really likes upside. So I could really see this being like Siobhan Ravel out of ECU because he really fits that type of mold. Just super athletic, big, long, rangy corner. There's definitely going to be questions in regards to his recovery from injury. We don't know the full extent to that injury, and those are going to be very important to figuring out, like, if he's going to go with this type of spot. So
Hmm.
definitely have to keep an eye on that. But I don't think I don't think there's a prospect that could match his level of athleticism and twitch at this size in terms of cornerbacks in this class. I mean, the tape back in 2023 and even early in 2024 before he got hurt, just special closing speed. You look at his recovery speed and trail, and like he can just absolutely make up that gap in just like a second. He will bait some bad quarterbacks into some like huge windows, and then he just closes it. I mean, there is some special traits there. I really think Ravel fits a lot of like what the Ballard looks for in a corner, so I'm gonna go with him at this spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard the term like build a corner. That's kind of what Ravel is, right? Like you look at the size, the length, the athleticism. You mentioned the closing speed. Some of the plays he was making, like from like outside leverage, running with crossers across the field, undercutting those throws for interceptions. It's a bummer that he got hurt. Obviously, medicals are going to be huge for him. The tape isn't always super clean. There is a little bit maybe of an over reliance, I feel like, on his athletic profile, which is going to be important considering he's coming off a torn ACL. But this
Definitely.
is like a player that has a lot of upside at the next level, and somebody that I'd be pretty excited about if I was a Colts fan. Going to the next pick, we are with the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons kind of offered us the most surprising pick of last year's draft. They took Michael Penix and what was kind of an off the wall type of selection. I guess that maybe
It
makes it
looks
a little
pretty
bit
good
more.
though.
Yeah, it looks decent now. Certainly an adventure. But I mean, I feel like, man, every single year we're talking about the same thing with the Falcons, man. They need a pass rusher. Like you just look at the guys on the roster. They traded for Matthew Judon, got absolutely nothing from him last year. I think Grady Jarrett's slowing down a little bit on the interior. They just were completely unable to get any semblance of a pass rush for the majority of the season, although things did get a little bit better down the stretch. You've got to take a pass rusher here. I'm going to take my guy, Mike Green. From Marshall. This is a player that I was really excited about. Once I started hearing his name, I think Dane Brugler was the first person I talk about him, and I got to his tape and turned on the Ohio State film, and he's out there ripping outside spin moves to beat their right tackle for a sack. There's a lot to like with Green's game, man, in terms of like the burst, the ability to jump off the rock, snap anticipation, really good with his hands at the top of the rush. Like I already mentioned, he's got a couple different pass rush rules that he can rely on. You talk about productivity, man, like on a per snap basis, this dude was absolutely dominant this year. Checks every single box. You watched him in Mobile, had a lot of, jaw dropping plays. He flattened the Oregon right tackle or left tackle who was playing right tackle at the time. His name escapes me at the moment. But he flattened him, got that, huge highlight moment, which, got a lot of oohs and ahs from the crowd. But the fact that Green came in at 250 pounds, he's still a little bit on the lighter side of the spectrum for sure. But he's an active run defender who plays with an absolutely red hot motor. So I'm really excited about what Green will be at the next level. And I'm hoping that finally we can get the Falcons a legitimate pass rusher for the first time in what seems like forever.
I think my first exposure to Mike Green was against like I believe it was Southeastern Missouri or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and it
Man
was
amongst boys.
yeah, it was just it was an absolute it was an absolute crap show just watching them try to block him.
Yeah.
In regards to the my next team, the Arizona Cardinals, I really just I think this team needs a space eater. I know they drafted Darius Robinson next year. He's more of like that hybrid 5 tech edge rusher type of guy.
Yep.
So I'm thinking that they need a guy who could just command space. And I mean, if you watch Ohio State's defense, Tyleik Williams, he was an absolute animal just controlling the line of scrimmage in the college football playoff. You watch him against Texas, Notre Dame, his ability to absorb contact at the line of scrimmage, absorb those doubles. You'll watch him use the drop knee technique to be able to just maintain his ground. And he has that heavy hands to be able to stack and shed. Like I really think especially with their ground game making its revival throughout the league, I think a player like Tyleik Williams is going to be a sought out commodity. And I think I saw somewhere that like he like when he dropped a bunch of weight at one point during the season or like during like the off season, he like ran like a 1.62 10-yard split, and I'm just like,
Oh my god.
I was like, there's no way. That is crazy for a dude who is like 330 pounds. Like, I think the Cardinals need that type of presence, and they haven't had it since late career JJ Watt, or maybe even
Yep.
Calais Campbell for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Williams, the thing that stuck out to me when I was watching him over the summer, I still need to go back and like finish my eval on him, but like just the ability to anchor, like you mentioned, against double teams, like hold his like gap control was a huge thing for him. And there are some flashes as a pass rusher, I think, that get you excited about him maybe becoming a little bit more of a complete player. But yeah, the Cardinals, like defensively, they were kind of, in my opinion, even like overachieving with the talent that they had last year. They still need a lot of bodies, but I am excited about the direction of like where Arizona's headed. So who do we got next here? We are on the Bengals. So the board breaks really well for the Bengals based on the way that we did this mock draft. And I think that here's the thing. Joe Burrow can go in front of every single camera that he wants to and campaign for Mike Brown to spend money. They've got a lot of interesting decisions. They got T. Higgins. Of course, Jamar Chase is going to be probably the highest paid wide receiver here in a couple of months. Trey Hendrickson also has like requested a trade a couple different times. They still need to bring him back on a contract. The Bengals are trying to win, but I refuse to believe that they are going to pay all three of those guys near the top of their position. I don't know who's going to be the odd man out. It's not going to be Jamar Chase. It's either going to be T. Higgins or Trey Hendrickson. I think it's going to ultimately be Higgins, one way or another. But that's honestly perfect because of the way this plays out, because Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona is still on the board for them here at 17. This is probably the floor to his draft range, I would say, but there's a lot to like with McMillan's game. I think that when you watch him move, he doesn't move like a guy of his stature. He's tall, he's rangy. He does line up like mostly on the outside, but Arizona actually used him like more as like a power slot this past season. He's not like the best separator in the world by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of like the ball skills and the ability to like use his size to create like those 50-50 contested catch opportunities, and oftentimes comes down with those, there's just a lot to like with this film. And one of the things I liked about McMillan's tape when I went back and watched it this season, I thought that he added more details to his game just in terms of setting guys up with off covers like rock or steps. He was using like more head fakes. There was more deception to his game, which was allowing him to get like open on a more consistent basis. I thought that he was a little bit too over reliant on trying to win those 50-50 balls. And I thought that this past season, that wasn't necessarily always the case. He improved as a separator, even though I acknowledge that's never going to be 100% how he wins as a receiver. But you look at the comparison a little bit to Higgins and some of the things that they do kind of within the same spectrum. I just think that what he can provide for you in the red zone, like on fades and just the ability to box guys out, I think that there's a really solid like wide receiver too with potential like low end wide receiver one upside, provided he continues to kind of expand his repertoire and round out his game.
Yeah, he's definitely got a very similar wingspan, target radius, in terms of how they're built. They're kind of both kind of a little bit slender for how tall they are, but they got that yak threat to go with them. Definitely makes a lot of sense here. Seattle is a very weird team. They really need some help on the interior offensive line, but I'm not sure the board broke for them in a way that was going to work out. And I don't think center is necessarily a strong enough position to take at this part of the draft. So I'm going to have them go and solve their linebacker problem. They went out and traded for Ernest Jones, and it kind of gave them a little bit of a shot in the arm, but they need a little bit of a long-term solution. So I'm going to give them Jahad Campbell out of Alabama. I mean, he brings just about everything to the table, whether it's an ability to blitz. Like, he has some really freakishly good like pass rush potential in terms of just being able to, rush off the edge, or just like, line up in the A gap. Like, his range to shut down outside runs is pretty special. And I've seen him run the pole plenty of times as a Tampa 2 coverage guy. His recognition, discipline to avoid the trash and get to the ball carrier. I mean, he's just a smart player. He was actually a former high school wide receiver too. So like, he's really coming to his own like throughout his career. So I think this is a high upside guy. I think this is a perfect spot for the first off-ball linebacker to go.
Yeah, Campbell's LB1 for me. I think you mentioned like the route recognition, his ability to, his just overall general feel and coverage. I think that there's a lot of upside there. And then as a run defender, not a stack and shed guy, but can shoot gaps. He flows, real rangy sideline to sideline guy. And you mentioned like the pass rush stuff. Like I think he actually, if I remember correctly, came to Alabama as an edge rusher. But you know those guys, when you got Dallas Turner, when you got Will Anderson, like on the edges, it's like where are we gonna play this guy? Where are we gonna? And Chris Braswell last year was drafted by Tampa, who was actually on the clock with this selection. So Tampa, a really interesting team because I already talked about Liam Cohen and how impressed I was with the offense last year, getting Baker Mayfield really comfortable, highly productive season. Their defense was a complete mess, man. Like it really was. At multiple different spots. I think that they could use an edge rusher, and that's like a strength of this class. I think they could also use a corner. They seem to always have issues keeping those guys healthy. But man, like their off-ball linebacker play was just so bad last year. And I just think in a Todd Bowles system and like what they actually need, they just need they need multiple players, honestly. Like Levante David is finally slowing down at like 35, 36 years old. I'm going to take Jalen Walker here. Yeah, I'm going to take Jalen Walker here from Georgia. And I know there's a lot of discussion about like where Walker's going to play at the next level. Some people are saying that they would try him out at edge. He's a little bit undersized to be like a full-time edge rusher. To me, he's more of like this kind of Swiss Army knife. And that's kind of the way that I think about him as a player. We didn't necessarily get to see him utilized the way that I wanted to see him utilized this past season. But there's a lot of upside with what he can bring, just because you look at an explosive player, like he's a very good athlete. He can win with speed. He can win with power. He actually has a little bit of pass rush moves to him as well. But I just think that this dude like plays so freaking hard all the time. The pursuit speed, we mentioned Campbell with the sideline to sideline range. That's exactly what Walker brings to you in terms of that as well. I've also like heard like rave character reviews about him. And the fit in Tampa in terms of with what Bowles likes to do with the blitz heavy system, walking guys down at the line of scrimmage, like he's going to be able to provide a lot of flexibility to you. I don't think, you're still going to have to probably go out and get another guy that can handle more of the coverage responsibilities. And you got to ultimately, with this type of player, you got to figure out like what you're going to do with him long term. He's got to have a primary home, whether it's at linebacker, whether it's at edge, whatever you want. But I think with both of those positions being needs and Walker having such a unique, dynamic skill set, I think he makes sense for Bowles. And this is one of the few landing spots. I'm not quite as high on Walker as like a top 20 player in this class, but this is one of the few landing spots that I actually think makes sense for him to reach like his peak.
Definitely. He's definitely one of those Swiss Army type of players. You don't really know like exactly what his best fit is, but he's a football player. He goes all out. That Texas game, his motor, his relentlessness, it wasn't necessarily like the most pretty in terms of how he was winning, but he was just consistently around the ball. And I love seeing that with a player like him.
I think coaches are going to like fall in love with him. And that's why like with this type of player, even though there's a little bit of cloudiness in terms of like, are we headed down the positionless player that doesn't really have a home? I worry about that. But at the same time, like I could just see a coaching staff like falling in love with him just in terms of like how hard he plays and also like some of the stuff around his like character. So
definitely. So Denver Broncos, they had a very promising first season with Bo Nix. They really leaned into like their play action game, but I don't really think that their ability to run is to the level that they want it to. Luckily for them, Ashton Jancy's just sitting right here, so we're just going to go ahead and plug him into the spot. I mean, you talk about explosiveness, speed, contact balance. Jancy has it all. Like he was awesome as a receiver the year prior, before this 2,500 yard rushing season. I mean, you watch him he fits just about any scheme. Like you want him to run outside zone, he can read outside zone. You want him to be patient and, get lost behind his blockers on, gap plays, pulling plays. He can do that. You want him to run inside zone, he can run inside zone. Jancy is about as flexible as a running back prospect as you can get. He can just do just about anything. His pass protection came along this past season. He really shows a lot of fight. to him. I really think the only question with him is, can he clean up the ball security a little bit? And,
Yep.
even if you look at like the full sample size, like his fumble rate isn't necessarily that bad. It was just because he had so many carries.
Touches, yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. And I really think he's the type of player that can carry that load for this Broncos offense and give Bo Nix like just that unbelievable security blanket underneath, because he's going to dump it down underneath when he gets that
Oh yeah.
chance.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite fits I think that we've had so far. I mean, with Genty, like the contact balance is like truly special. You know exactly what you get. Positional value be damned. Like this is one of the better players in the draft. And just such a clean, easy projection because he had such a phenomenal season. And I can't wait to watch him in the NFL. I think he's going to be a really special player. He's my type of back, man. That's why I loved him so much coming out of summer. And, he had a great season. So we are up to the premier spot in the program. The Pittsburgh Steelers are up at 21, and I think the board breaks pretty well for us here, man. Like we got a lot of guys, to kind of go through here, select. Ultimately, the Steelers are running it back, and I have a lot of questions about like the overall direction of the franchise. But whether it's through free agency, whether it's through the draft, really just focused on adding good players. Like simple as that. Regardless, there's not an answer at quarterback here. I don't want to force a pick. It would really upset me, honestly, if they did at this point in the draft. So I'm gonna, consider needs in terms of like defensive line. I think cornerbacks a potential need here as well in the first round. But ultimately, we look at like what happened last year and everything that transpired. I think wide receiver is like the number one thing that they absolutely have based on the way that their roster is constructed. And it also matches up to where the board is right now. And I'm going to take Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden in this spot. Curious about what you feel about this pick. But Golden, listed 6 foot, 195 pounds. I think he's a little bit smaller than that, but he had a really nice season after transferring to Texas. From Houston, I believe, but this is a really refined route runner. He varies his tempo against cornerbacks off balance. He could beat off coverage. He was really good against press. Has a myriad of different releases in his bag to be able to kind of manipulate guys, get their shoulders, get their hips turned, and then kind of cross their face. There's a lot of like highlight worthy contested catches on his film as well. He's excellent in the red zone for his size. I do think that. There are some things in terms of like just the way that he runs routes as a separator. I just think it's easily translatable. I talk a lot about this, but separation is king in the NFL, and guys that can create space for themselves without needing, assistance from like bunches, rubs, alignment, anything like that. He can play outside, he can play inside, X, Z, on the ball, off the ball. It doesn't matter. This dude can do a little bit of everything. The big question I have about him that I think is ultimately going to define just how good he can be at the next level is, there are some times like play strength, I think shows up with him. He is really competitive, but I do think that sometimes he's difficult to get a hand on, but if you can get your hands on him, sometimes you can kind of slow him up and kind of halt his route progress. But really smooth operator, man, can move around the formation for you. I don't necessarily think he's got truly dynamic, like wide receiver, like upper tier, upper echelon wide receiver one type of traits. But I do think that this is going to be a really good player and somebody, like I've said, like I think there is absolutely a realm of possibility that this is the best receiver in this class when it's all said and done, depending on the situation that he lands in. So what do you think? Let's spend a couple minutes here talking about the board for the Steelers. You can give your thoughts on Golden and if this is the direction that you would take if you were on the clock here.
I think I'm in a bit of a split decision here because I see the whole thought process behind this, and I really do think defensive line is breaking in a way that like you can wait it out a bit longer to address that position. And wide receiver, might make more sense at this juncture. The thing about Golden that you talk about the ability to like separate, but it's also his ability to win the ball in the air. Like you have that combination of those two, and the fact you're not just relying on separation or just a pure ball winner, and you have that like mesh of those two things. That's what kind of gives you that like complete receiver type of guy, even if he ends up being more of like a wide receiver too. But like we've seen what Jordan Addison is doing as a wide receiver too for the Vikings, and I really think he could give you that type of ability as a vertical breaker, as a guy who could win the ball in the air. And from what I've seen of him, he's a clean character, man. Like
Hmm.
he gives it his all every play, and just the fact he was so reliable. The fact he fought back from injury in a couple of the games, during the college football playoff. Like I really respect this dude's grit, and I really think he would fit the mentality of this type of team. So I definitely get the thought process behind this pick. I might have gone a little bit of a different direction, maybe gone Kenneth Grant and gone with a nose tackle and then like addressed like a 5 technique later. But I like this direction. I think you had your mind in the right spot.
Yeah, Golden, man. Like I'm just a sucker for this archetype of wide receiver, man. Guys that can get in and out of their breaks. I think his ability to kind of decel is really nice. I think the tempo that he plays with, there's so much polish to his game, man. And I look at him and I instantly feel like I can see him being a successful wide receiver at the next level. And knowing how Pittsburgh kind of botched their pursuit of adding another playmaker, we'll see what happens with George Pickens in the offseason. But you mentioned the character stuff too. I kind of would like for the Steelers to draft somebody that I'm not worried about becoming a head case in a couple years.
Exactly.
So that kind of does factor into the decision. You mentioned like Kenneth Grant. I also would have considered like Walter Nolan here at this spot. I'd have considered him just for like the high upside play with the traits. I'm sure we'll get into his kind of evaluation in terms of corner. Like there are like. I'm personally like Azareye'h Thomas is a top 20 player for me in this class, like with ease. And I don't know that he is that for a lot of other people, but he would be somebody that like I would consider here as well. Ultimately, I'm a little bit higher on the depth of the cornerback class, the depth of the defensive line class, whereas I do see like a little bit more of a drop off in my first like 3 or 4 wide receivers to kind of some of the day 2 guys that I think have more questions, more holes in their game to where I can kind of poke at. But all right, yeah, you're up next on the clock.
So I'm gonna be very uncreative and do what every mock draft has been doing and give the Chargers Colston Loveland at this spot.
Easy eval.
Absolutely. I need to get this across because I think this is just understated. At 19 years old, playing with JJ McCarthy, I thought this dude was the best route runner I've seen as a tight end prospect.
Mm-hmm.
And I just need to get that across. Like he was 19, and I thought he was that advanced with his route running. His ability, just as a like on the move, like improvising, he absolutely gets deception to a degree. There was like a play against Purdue. I have to talk about this one because this one just gets me so fired up. Like McCarthy scrambling outside the pocket and like. He knows there's space to the outside, but he's like, all right, I don't want this guy on my hip anymore. So I'm gonna kind of like fake I'm gonna go upfield and just kind of like turn my shoulders, and then I give him a slight push off to the outside. And I'm like, oh my god, dude, that's like special. And you watch him out of his breaks, like they put him in motion so many times, and just his ability to be able to decel, sink his hips out of his breaks, that is special type of stuff. And I really think he can function in line as a blocker enough that I don't have to worry about him. I really thought he started to improve upon that this past year. The production, no questions. I have none. The Michigan quarterback situation this past
Terrible.
year, it was just awful. Just evaluate the tape that's in front of you, understand the type of prospect he is, and just take him at this spot. Justin Herbert is known as the if man. Well, Colston Loveland is the if man of tight ends right now.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I watched Michigan several times during the season this year. When they were on offense, I usually found myself wanting to do other things. But you mentioned like just the efficiency getting out of his breaks. I mean, this is a dude that can like line up in the slot, and he's going to cook whoever's lined up across from him. To be honest with you, I think
can line up wide too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an easy projection in terms of what he's going to provide for you as a wide receiver, and like him getting to the point where like Justin Herbert, like getting him and McConkey. I mean, I would still like for them to eventually like upgrade over Quentin Johnston on the outside, but like that gives you a like legit 1-2 punch, and of course, like the connection there with Harbaugh makes a ton of sense too. So,
yes.
All right, we'll kind of move on to the next pick. I do like that one though. I just brought up Walter Nolan. I'm actually going to take him for Green Bay. The Packers this year, when you watch them play, I was a little bit disappointed with how the Packers season played out, just because I had such high expectations coming into the season. I think defensively they kind of matched those expectations, maybe to a different degree than I was anticipating though. Like I thought their front was actually going to be better. I was notably extremely low on the Lucas Van Ness pick. I just not my style of player, and ultimately that hasn't panned out for them. But I do think that like you saw guys take steps back in their trenches on the defensive side of the ball. Kenny Clark looks like things are kind of coming off the rails a little bit with him. Rashawn Gary hasn't quite been the same player recently either. So I'm going to take another pass rusher here. Give me Nolan. This is a kid who former like number 1 overall recruit coming out of high school. I mean, this is a dude that kind of always envisioned was going to end up being a Sunday player. And I think last season you really started some of those flashes started to become a little bit more consistent. But the thing that I see when I pop on Nolan's film is there are about 2 to 3 plays every single game where he looks like the best player in the country. And I think that's incredibly enticing for a team like the Packers, who typically does like to bet on guys with high athletic upside. And I definitely think that Nolan has that. When he times the snap and is locked in and engaged, he can really get off the rock with a lot of urgency. There are times where like he's able to get into blockers' frames and just completely throw them out of the way. The amount of reps where he's just running through guys' chest is really interesting to me. I think as a 3 tech that is basically relied on, and you just say, hey, see ball, get ball, this dude can absolutely do that for you. And like I said, this is an upside play for me, but this is the type of player that the Packers really need to be shooting for, and somebody that I think maybe has a little bit of a lower floor than some of the other guys at this position in this class, considering how loaded the group is. But you can't deny like Nolan's traits in his toolbox, and that's kind of where I'm going with this.
I think it definitely helps that he had a decent week down in Mobile too, really showing his stuff against some of the top competition. I'm going to go in a interesting direction for the Vikings. I really think their interior offensive line came off the rails towards the end of the season. I think Sam Darnold himself was struggling with that interior pressure. They're going to really want JJ McCarthy to be able to step into those cleaner pockets because, he was a guy who liked to climb as opposed to go outside the pocket. It was actually one of my favorite traits about McCarthy. And I really think giving them a mauling presence is what they need. So I'm giving them Tyler Booker out of Alabama. I actually have a friend who used to work down at IMG Academy, and he used to rave to me about Booker every day. He was like, dude, you're gonna love what you see from this guy, like just consistently. And like he was a leader down there. And from what I was reading, from Daniel Jeremiah's list, he mentioned that the sources at Bama were comparing his leadership to like Will Anderson, and I'm like, oh man, you watch him in pass protection.
We'll take that.
Yeah. You need that type of leader on your offensive line, considering you kind of lack it, and just a physical pass protector. He's always looking for work. He will plant dudes into the ground, and like they just really need that type of mauling presence. And you watch him be able to move out in space, like he can run those outside zone schemes, like he can effectively pull out in space and just go destroy dudes out of the second level. Like I really think Booker makes probably the most sense, and this is probably like my favorite fit out of anyone for the teams I've had to give. Like I just think Booker fits everything that the Vikings need at this point.
Yeah, and the interior of that offensive line, like at times, like Ed Ingram hasn't necessarily panned out the way they wanted to. I just think it was almost borderline untenable. So regardless, like getting JJ McCarthy, we think that that's a really good ecosystem for him to operate within, right? You got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hockenson, got the weapons. I think, they're going to probably add a running back at some point in the draft too, but I like the direction. Obviously, I trust Kevin O'Connell a ton too, and I think Booker provides them an immediate starter, and I think that that's really interesting. Speaking of like perfect fits, just the way that this board is kind of breaking for me, I actually have one that I really like here for Houston. Houston was, again, one of the more disappointing. They actually ended up winning a playoff game, but one of the more disappointing teams, similar to the Packers. I had higher expectations. The Bobby Slowick offense was dreadful to watch this past year. The situations that they were putting CJ Stroud in. If you wouldn't have taken Booker, I would have taken him right here. But instead, I'm actually going to take Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. And kind of the thought process, I know they acquired Steph Diggs, but he's a free agent. He's also coming off a significant injury. Tank Dell is also coming off another significant injury in his own right. We know Nico Collins is really special, working on the outside as an X. They're going to be kind of shifting in a little bit of a different direction on offense. And I just think with Ibuka, who I've done a film room breakdown on the channel already for channel members, I just think that you know exactly what you're getting with Ibuka. Such a fantastic receiver in terms of just reliability. You know exactly where he's going to be at all times. He's a smart route runner, understands how to get open. One of the things that I think, or the thing that I think Ibuka does better than anyone, not just in this class, but maybe of anyone that I've ever scouted, just in terms of working back to the football.
Yes.
Just
love that trait.
I mean, there's so much to like about like I said, just his reliability. We did not really get to see him work a ton on the outside. I wish we would have gotten more experience with that, where you compare his game to a guy like Matthew Golden coming out of Texas. You have to use your imagination a little bit more about how that's going to look like at the next level. But I do trust Ibuka with the ball in his hands. I know exactly what he's going to be at the next level in terms of like moving the chains for me. And also, like, one of the things that I really like is just he's a really competitive blocker, man. Like some of the things that Ohio State asked him to do in terms of like coming across the formation, I do see like shades of like Robert Woods to Emeka Ibuka's game. And I think that some of these offenses, like especially like playoff contenders, I think you can just kind of plug and play him, and he's going to be a winning type of player that's going to contribute right away, even if I don't think that he's like the highest upside of like the receivers in this class. But yeah, good player, man. And a reunion with CJ Stroud, I think, is pretty enticing for me here.
Oh, definitely. Like Stroud's one of those smart, like one of those guys who's like smart beyond his years, and I think Ibuka is like the same way. I don't know if you've seen the clip of him, speaking to Will Howard about the 56-yard pass to Jeremiah Smith. He says, "Run a go ball on 29. Look at his inside leverage." Like when Carnell Tate was attacking him, and like they end up getting that pass, and it ends up working out for them. So I really think having that type of mind at wide receiver to mesh with a mind like the quarterback of CJ Stroud, like that's the type of special stuff you want to see at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with another Ohio State guy this time for the Rams. I really think their tackle play was kind of what undid them, and I think Matthew Stafford was just. I don't have words sometimes to describe his pocket, his ability to play under pressure, but like down the stretch, he was just unbelievably special. I'm going to give them a guy out of Ohio State that I really think just was having an amazing season before he went down with the knee injury. Josh Simons, I'm not sure how you say it, but he ends up going out with the knee injury, but his ability to mirror and pass protection is so effortless. Like his feet are just so calm. He's got a good punch on contact. He's just so fluid. Played guard the year prior, so like he has versatility to be able to plug into a different spot if the Rams so happen to need that. And I really think, with the fact that Les Snead's just been killing it in the draft lately, I think having a player like Simmons just fall to this spot at this juncture would only continue that trend. So, yep, gonna go with Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Simmons, man, you mentioned like if he'd have played like more games this past season, I think we'd be talking about him as a potential like OT1 type of player. Like, we would be talking about him inside the top 10. And you mentioned just like the Rams needing to solidify the offensive line, regardless of who's at quarterback. We don't know how much longer Stafford's going to play, but I do think that this is, a route that LA could go. And like you mentioned with Les Snead, man, like, who knows? Like you give the dude picks, and all of a sudden he like does really well with them. So we'll see what he does. In April. But up next is Baltimore, and the Ravens kind of tick me off as an organization because every draft weekend they end up getting some player that I think like should not be available to them late in the first round because they always win a bunch of games, and they kind of just are able to restock the cupboard. It's a really smart, well-run organization. I know I speak for a lot of the people that are subscribers to this channel. Is like as much as you hate them, you have to respect their process and the way they go about their business. And that's why I'm going to take Azareye'h Thomas here from Florida State. Like I said, he's actually higher on my personal board. I'm just not really sure necessarily of how the league views him. But I think the league should be pretty dang high on this kid, man. They took Nate Wiggins last year, first round, and I think like pairing Thomas with him along with Marlon Humphrey, who kind of kicked into the slot last year, would be one heck of a trio, man. Thomas, he won't turn 21 years old until after he's drafted. He's 6'2", 198 pounds. Went to the Senior Bowl. I thought at days 2 and 3 really impressed me in one-on-one drills, especially once it got down to the red zone. 350 coverage snaps last year, only allowed 17 catches. I mean, this dude was an absolute blanket. He literally took away one side of the field completely in Florida State's man-heavy, press-heavy system. He plays big, suffocates guys down the boundary. He understands how to use the sideline to his advantage. I think for a taller corner, he's really fluid. He's really loose in his hips. He can get up and go. He's pretty technically refined at the line of scrimmage. Although I think he's going to have to be a little less reliant on that two-hand jam at the next level because guys will be kind of able to get their hands off him a little bit easier. But the biggest room for improvement, man, is just like run defense. I just thought he took some pretty poor angles to the football. But in terms of like coverage ability, going back and looking at my big board from last year, Renardo Green was the guy that I was higher on my board in terms of comparison to the consensus board. Renardo Green had like 9 pass breakups once he got inserted into the 49ers starting lineup, had a really productive rookie season. I see a similar path for Azareye'h Thomas, but I see even more upside because I think he's a lot better of an athlete and he's a little bit bigger than Green was. So, I'm a huge fan. This is one of my guys in this class. And as much as it would pain me to see him in a Ravens uniform, I think this would be an excellent selection for them.
Yeah, you mentioned how the board just breaks for them every time. I mean, they got Nate Wiggins, who was my cornerback 1 last year, and he really just showed like his ability down the stretch. So getting a guy like Thomas to pair with him, that gives him a duo potentially for years to come. Moving on to the Detroit Lions. Unfortunate way for their season to end, and honestly, it's just crazy that they were even in that spot, considering all the injuries they had suffered. You really look at like the lack of Aiden Hutchinson down the stretch. It was definitely hurting them, but also they just kind of lack a true speed bend rusher on the other side next to him. So I'm going to give him a personal favorite of mine. I've been a fan of this dude since like his early days of Florida, and I really think his speed and his explosiveness has really like just become more and more evident. I'm going to give him Princely Umanmielen out of Ole Miss. You watch him just be able to bend the corner. There are very few guys that can just corner that edge at that speed through the contact the way he does. And he ended up being second in the SEC this year in terms of pressures with 55. I really think that style of pass rush makes for the perfect contrast to Aiden Hutchinson. And yeah, it's a bit wild to have him going over James Pierce at this spot, but I think the bend is more notable with his overall game than, say, Pierce, who I think has more of a stronger power profile, which I think they already kind of have with what they're working with. So I'm going to give them the speed rusher, Umanmielen.
Yeah, I mean, Princely's actually a guy we've had on the channel before. I've been a big fan of his game, like you said, dating back to his days at Florida. The ability to bend the edge, very, very evident. I mean, this dude is smooth, man.
Yes.
He can corner with the best of them. I think him opposite Aiden Hutchinson is an excellent pick. I'm excited about, that possibility. I think he could also be on the board at this point. You mentioned James Pierce. I think that, when you talk about teams that need a pass rusher, I think the Commanders, like a lot of smoke is out there about could they be in the running for like maybe Myles Garrett, who requested a trade. Just because of like, I think their timeline's kind of accelerated, right? You like get a rookie quarterback who has that type of special of a season. You already saw them kind of accelerate that timeline by trading for Marshawn Lattimore midseason last year. They're like, oh, we've got something pretty special here. We want to kind of take a swing. And a swing that I think is notable to take here is like if they don't use this pick to acquire a guy like Garrett, getting a pass rusher like James Pierce. And I think with Pierce, he was talked about as like a top 5, top 10 caliber prospect in the summer. And I didn't really see that consistently. I thought that there was a chance. Yeah, I thought that we could see that over the course of the season. I do think he got off to a little bit of a slow start, kind of started to pick it up as things kind of progressed throughout the season. But this is like a really long, like he's really long, he's lean, he's only listed, I think, about like 245 pounds, pass rush specialist. One thing that's interesting with Pierce is you mentioned like the power profile with him.
Yes.
He converts speed to power a lot better than you would expect a guy with his type of frame, mainly because of those long arms. But his first couple of steps off the ball, super explosive. I remember that was the thing that stuck out to me during summer scouting, is like he was consistently getting off the ball and getting his first step in the ground after rolling off his front foot almost quicker than like everybody else still had their hand in the dirt. So it's a huge advantage for him. The reason why I like the fit with the Commanders specifically when I'm trying to find a team for him is that Dan Quinn is there. And while I don't think that him and him and Micah Parsons are necessarily similar rushers, they were kind of deployed a little bit similarly based on their usage. When Quinn got to Dallas, that's when we started to see Parsons line up in the A and B gap and kind of terrorize rushers on the interior with his speed, his ability to cross face. That's some of the same stuff that we got to saw Pierce do while in college at Tennessee. I actually think that's a really good idea of how to use him at the next level too, as kind of a movable chess piece. And I think that alignment versatility is going to be evident for Pierce. And there's a lot to like with him. And I do think he competes as a run defender. I wouldn't necessarily say that he's like a great one at this stage of his career. Like I would like to see him continue to get a little bit stronger, but this is still a player that I'm excited about long term.
In terms of his pass rush like ability, though, it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Clowney in terms of just like lining up in the A gap, the power profile, speed, but not quite the bend to take that corner. Yeah, I really think he's kind of similar.
That's the difference, in my opinion. That's the difference between him and like a guy like Ahmad Miellyn. Ahmad Miellyn has the ability to kind of corner and bend through contact with a little bit more lower body flexibility. Whereas like with Pierce, like one of the things I was underwhelmed with in the summer is like if he didn't beat guys cleanly around the outside shoulder with speed and guys were able to get his hands on him, it just felt like he was a little tight hipped, a little bit more. And I think some of that's just his frame, right? Like he's got that long, lean frame. So he's a really unique style of rusher, but they need pass rush help bad.
Yes, for sure. We talk about a team that potentially, could need some pass rush help. I mean, maybe Buffalo, but I really think once like Christian Benford went down with an injury in the AFC title, their lack of depth at corner really started to creep its head. Kaiir Elam has not become that press man shutdown corner they hoped for. So with, the injury to Benjamin Morrison and, not having quite the season he wanted, I really think this makes a appropriate sense to pounce on this type of opportunity. I mean, we saw him the year prior being able to shut down Marvin Harrison Jr., like just his ability to mirror his crazy length, the size, fluidity combo. You watch him operate like just impressed, man. Like his patience, his ability to read the back shoulder. Like he's just a sought out commodity in that regard. The hip injury was really unfortunate, but it presents an opportunity for the Bills here to really potentially solve that press man corner that they've been so desperately searching for. So I'm going to go with Benjamin Morrison here.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about this with Ravel too. Like medical rechecks are going to be huge in Indy. Yes. I think, anytime I think it's a hip injury for Morrison. So like that's always a little sketchy because that's kind of, important for that position. But in terms of like the film was really good 2 years ago. Unfortunately, he missed a good amount of time this past year. But, going up, like I said, we're recording this before the Super Bowl. We're just going to assume that the Chiefs are going to take this thing home just because like it's what they do. But hopefully we at least get a good game. But, we're going to say that they're going to win this game. The Eagles are up here at 31. It's funny. I just did a piece for SteelersNow.com talking about Milton Williams as a potential splashy free agent signing option for the Steelers if they want to go out and get a 3 technique instead of getting one in the draft, which this is a really good class for that. If Williams does walk, I could see them being interested in Derek Harmon from Oregon. This is a guy that I'm really optimistic about. Kind of can do some of the same things for them. They always like to have a rotation of guys up front. They've got the Georgia boys, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis up there already. But I think, you look at Harmon, he dropped 15 pounds this past season. He was in the back foot on a consistent basis, man. 55 pressures a career high. Would like to see him finish at a higher, more consistent rate. But I just think the ability to get off the rock, but also like I thought he improved as a run defender based on the film that I saw from Michigan State. I just thought that he was incredibly disruptive, and as a guy that you're going to be searching for a attacking three technique like you would for this Philly defense. And I also think like he's good enough in terms of like taking on double teams that, if they're in their system where they ask to play, in a light box, guys take on multiple blockers at a time. He's not going to be completely overwhelmed, but he's one of the bigger surprises for me on film through kind of like this process. And I've really enjoyed Hartman's game, and I could see him being a first round pick.
Definitely agree on that. And with the Kansas City Chiefs on the clock here, you really could go multiple directions. They kind of addressed their tackle position in the draft last year with Kingsley Suamataia, but then he was raw coming out, and the results showed itself to be raw, and they kind of had to move Joe Thuney to tackle just to solve that type of position. So, they could go with tackle here, but instead, I'm going to go with one of the best available players. I mean, just the fact he's here at 32 is just insane, but we're going to go with Kenneth Grant, one of the biggest freaks out of Michigan. Like, this dude is 6'3", 350 pounds, and he is just an absolute freak of nature off the rock. You watch him be able to just absolutely destroy dudes out in terms of his power profile. He was on the Feldman's freak list. Like, he had like a plyo stairs test with a series of 7 26-inch high stairs, and he just like clears it instantly. Like, the fact he's able to just do what he's able to do as like a space eater, I really think they could get this like potential Dexter Lawrence type of upside out of a guy like Kenneth Grant. And I think that's kind of what they're like looking at on the interior. Maybe they could have gone with Darius Alexander and maybe thought about, thinking ahead for Chris Jones and, his potential, his fall off eventually that will come at some point. Father time comes for everyone at some point. But
sure.
I think, getting that type of space eater and Kenneth Grant would just change the foundation of their run defense, which is, it's pretty scary to think about considering they have such big dudes, like even like at linebacker, a guy like Leah Chanel, like just getting a guy like that in the middle of your defensive line will make that even stronger to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, guys listed 340 pounds are not supposed to move like Kenneth Grant. And like, as much as you acknowledge that, the pass rush plan could be a little bit more refined, like he needs to add some moves, some more counters to his repertoire. I do think like his ability to kind of push the pocket, and then some of the high-end flashes, like as a dominant run defender, like really get you excited about what he could be. And for a team like the Chiefs that already has like a really good roster, and pairing him next to Chris Jones, and like, not to say that Chris Jones is going to be able to like transfer all of his pass rush powers down to Kenneth Grant, but like it's a pretty good mentor for somebody that kind of needs some further refinement. But yeah, I think Grant absolutely it makes a lot of sense there. But all right, man, we did it. 32 teams, full first round mock draft. We ran a little bit longer on time as we typically do, but we really appreciate everybody's continued support on the pod. Be sure to let us know what you guys thought. If you guys want to see more mock drafts, we will be back next week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed by the time this podcast dropped the Super Bowl. And also like, let us know what you guys think. Who are some of your favorite picks? Drop us any questions that you guys have in the comments, and we will check you guys next time. Peace and love.